is in motherfucking session. Let's go. Do not cancel me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the wait, right? Unit 2 was about like 3 weeks ago to almost a month ago. I had to organize my life so that a young nigga can give y'all more content more consistently. So I had to do a lot of research for this unit as well. Yeah, that took hella time. Next time it won't take as long. And thank you for waiting. I also feel like I've been overdoing this hat, so we're gonna just keep this hat for unit 3 for continuity, and then we're probably gonna go with a different one starting unit 4. So somebody asked me, am I using ChatGPT for these videos? No, I use primary sources for my research. I go through documentation, I read books. The most I may use AI for is to like structure my notes and shit, but AI gets the shit from us, so we could just go do it ourselves. So if you ever see me like looking off screen, I'm looking at my computer, but I'm like looking right here, it's because I'm looking at my notes. I have notes right here to tell me where we're going, how, you know, this is like a lecture. I have little notes right here to tell me what the fuck is going on, okay? All right, before we jump in to unit 3, let's do a quick unit 2 recap, okay? Because I know some of y'all just skipped straight here like it was nothing. So boom, unit 2 was basically this. After all them big ancient empires collapsed, Rome, Mesopotamia, all of that, right? The world ain't just log off like a fucking bad Wi-Fi connection. Nah, the system switched skins. Same game, new map, okay? Instead of straight up slavery everywhere, now niggas is farming, okay? Everybody is farming, okay? If you not farming, you're probably dead. Now, instead of being owned directly, you are tied to the land. Congratulations, you're a motherfucking peasant, okay? You can't read, you can't leave, you don't know what the king doing with your motherfucking grain, but best bet, he eating good, okay? And we broke down how this wasn't just Europe with castles and knights like some fucking Disney movie. No, this shit was global. Western Europe, lords, serfs, Turks telling you God said stay broke, nigga. Eastern Europe, same shit, but worse. They said, oh, y'all loosening it up over there? Nigga, we tightening the belt around here. Bow, belt to Eastern European ass. In the Islamic world, you got strong states, taxes, trade, still extracting from peasants, but much more organized. Wait, this is why we still see deep institutionality within Western Asia today. India, they said, we not even gonna chase you, nigga. The caste is gonna keep you in line. That shit is crazy. Africa, trade empires, tribute, slavery doing most of the heavy lifting, okay? Good old-fashioned fucking slavery in Africa. America's Aztecs and Inca, like, nigga, you not paying money. You're paying labor, okay? Fuck the money. I want you to work. You build roads whether you like it or not around here. So different systems, different flavors, same core logic. Yo ass work, they eat. Don't let the history books fucking fool you. Don't let this shit lie to you. This shit was not peaceful. Peasants was revolting. Slaves was revolting. Okay? Niggas was running away. Niggas was forming their own communities. Niggas was not just sitting there like, oh yes, my lord. Oh yes, my majesty, by the divine right. Your rule is glory. Fuck all that. Okay? Niggas was not going for that all day. Then we get to the most important part. Capitalism ain't just pop out of nowhere like some random update. It grew inside of feudalism. You got merchants getting rich. You got cities growing. You got money coming back. And slowly but surely, the old system starts cracking. Boom! Enclosures. Kicking niggas off the land. Fuck, you thought you was tied to the land, nigga? Get the fuck off the land. Colonialism. We taking your motherfucking land. You thought you was tied to the land, nigga? We taking this shit. Slavery. Exploit your motherfucking land, nigga. You thought you was finna not work? You thought you was not finna work, nigga, get in this fucking field. Extraction, we're taking every fucking thing. Okay, we're coming here. If you got rubber, if you got gold, if you got, I don't give a fuck what you got, I'm taking it. And now you got a new system. So now in unit 3, oh my God, this is where this shit gets crazy. This is colonialism, nigga. We're in the big pie. This is the shit right here. This is what we've been fucking waiting for. We step into the birth of the modern world. Factories, capitalism, the fucking proletariat, me and you, race being invented. I'm black now. Empire went global. These niggas blew up overnight. Basically, that's everything that's fucking up your life right now. And this is where it starts. Right here. Colonialism. Let's fucking go. Let's fucking get into it. Let's rock out. Before we move forward, though, let's talk about the world before colonialization. Because we gotta clear something up. A lot of people think that Europe came into empty, undeveloped lands, which is completely false. Before colonialization, the Americas had complex and advanced societies. You had the Incas, you had the Aztecs, you had the Mississippi River civilizations. These weren't primitive. They had organized labor systems. They had tribute economies. They had large cities. They had trade networks, okay? Even agriculture was advanced. The Three Sisters farming corn, beans, squash was ecological balance and knowledge of the land. And systems like Kipu, which were like recording history, record keeping. So when colonialization happens, it doesn't create civilization, it destroys and replaces existing systems. In Africa, you have the same thing. You've got major kingdoms, Ashanti, Congo, Oyo, Benin, Nagando. They weren't isolated, they were part of trans-Saharan trade, coastal trade networks, trading gold, salt, slaves. They had political systems. They had bureaucracies. They had armies. Even in East Africa, you had Swahili city-states. You had Indian Ocean trade. And in North Africa, you had Ottoman-controlled regions. So again, these are active systems. Colonialization doesn't create them. It reshapes and exploits them. In Asia, it was like the economic center of the world. This is where people really get it wrong, right? Before Europe dominates, Asia is actually, again, the center of global economy. In Mughal India, one of the richest regions in the world, you had massive production of cotton and indigo, and you had a strong currency system. In China, you had huge population, you had strong state, you had tax systems, and you had a silver-based economy. In the Ottoman Empire, you had major regional power and organized taxation, plus land systems, right? In Southeast Asia, you had spice kingdoms and trade hubs such as Malacca and Asa. The world is already developed. Europe didn't create the world, they reorganized it. They took existing systems and plugged them into a new global machine. We must understand that to understand the developments that we see transpire going forward. Colonialism. Now this is where everything changes. Up until now, the world was basically running on land. You got feudal niggas, right? You got tributary niggas. You got peasant farming niggas. You got elite niggas taking everything. Everything was local. You grow food here, it stays here. You get taxed here, it stays here. Power is tied to the land. But now, the whole fucking planet gets connected by force. And that's the key. This ain't, oh, niggas started trading more. This ain't, oh, globalization happened naturally. Fuck no. This is the violent creation of the world market. This is guns, ships, forts, maps, empires pulling up on other continents saying, oh yeah, this shit ours now. And what changes is crazy. Before, exploitation was local. Now, you got people in Africa being enslaved, sent to the Americas to grow sugar for Europeans, while silver from the Americas is being shipped to Asia. All at the same time, all simultaneously. The whole world gets stitched together into one system. That is new. That was the innovation of colonialism. That's what we call world economy. And here's where it gets even crazier. This shit feeds itself. War creates empire. Empires create wealth. Wealth funds more war. And war expands the system. That is your dialectics, my nigga. While all of this is happening, society itself is also getting reshaped. Religion is used to justify conquest. Race gets invented to control labor. Patriarchy gets stronger to control reproduction and inheritance. Nations start forming as states organize people and information. And we not just talking about Europe, right? This shit touches everywhere. Africa, the Americas, China, India, the Islamic world, Southeast Asia, the Pacific, everywhere. So in this unit, we're breaking down how the modern world was built through violence, through extraction, through connection, through contradiction. Marx says that capitalism enters the world dripping in blood and dirt. Okay? So by the end of this, you're going to understand something simple. Capitalism did not just rise. It was forced into existence. Now, before we start untangling this web, we have to understand all of these empires that we're going to talk about, Spain, Portugal, Dutch, British, French, they're not random. They're all running the same system, the same machine. They are just different operators. And if you don't understand the machine, you're gonna get lost in the details. You're gonna think it's just history facts. Nah, this is a system that we're looking to understand. So let's break it down real simple. Every empire has the same core parts. First thing, extraction. They take something. Always. Gold, silver, sugar, cotton, spices, rubber, land, labor, resources. Okay? That's the whole fucking point. Empires don't expand for fun. They don't expand for religion. They don't expand for belief. They expand to extract. Every colony becomes what? A plug, a supply zone, a place where wealth gets pulled out and sent somewhere else. But here's the thing, extraction don't work unless you control niggas, right? So now you need systems to force niggas to work. This is where you get slavery. This is where you get forced labor. This is where you get tributary systems. This is where you get debt. Peasants tied to the land. Contracts that ain't really contracts. Different forms, same purpose. Make sure niggas produce whether they like it or not. Then you got resources. Now you got to move these resources. Now you have to sell these resources. Turn them into profit. Empires held trade routes, ports, shipping networks, companies, banks. Now everything is connected. Silver from the America goes to Europe, then to Asia. Sugar from the Caribbean goes to Europe. Spices from Asia go everywhere. This is where the world starts becoming one system. Now you might be thinking, how do they keep all this running? Simple. Force, army, navies, guns, laws, prisons, punishment. If people resist, they get crushed. If regions rebel, they get invaded. The state wants to protect the system. Always. Every single motherfucking time. Now here is the sneaky part though. This is where shit gets deep. You can't just control people physically. You have to control how they think. So empires create ideologies to justify everything that they're doing. They doing abhorrent, violent, evil shit. They need to create reasons on why. So you have religion. God wants this. You have race. People are inherently inferior. You have patriarchy. Men control women. Families stay in line. Then you have civilization. We're helping them. The white man's burden. All of this is used to make exploitation feel normal. And this is something people don't talk about enough. Empires just don't control land and labor. They control knowledge, mapping the world, studying plants, cataloging people, rewriting history, destroying cultures. If you control knowledge, you control reality. So now let's step back. Every empire we are about to talk about is running the same machine. Extract resources, control labor, move goods globally, enforce it with violence, and justify it with ideology. Control knowledge. That's the system. So now, don't look at Spain like it's just Spain. Don't look at Britain like it's just Britain. Look at them like operators, running the same machine in different ways. And now let's begin with the first one. Let's look at how Spain ran this machine and why it changed the entire world. Spain. This is the first empire that doesn't just expand. They plug entire continents into the machine. So what is Spain actually taking? Silver. Not just some silver, all the fucking silver. We're talking about one of the most insane extraction operations in human history. Potosi in modern Bolivia was one of the largest cities in the world at the time because of this. Then you have Mexican silver mines, which are still being mined today. After around the mid 1500s and especially 1545, these places start producing like fucking massive amounts of silver. Here's the key. The silver is not just sitting there collecting dust. It's moving. It funds Spain's wars in Europe. It floods European markets, and a huge amount ends up in China. So now, think about what's happening. Indigenous labor in the Americas, producing silver that travels across the world to fuel Asian economies. That's a world system forming in real time. Spain is also extracting dye that was used for red coloring, which was super valuable at the time. And they were extracting other luxury goods from places like Peru and Guatemala. So the Americas become a resource hub for global markets. Now, this is where the system really begins to show its ass, right? It begins to show itself because none of this extraction works without controlling labor. Spain sets up systems like the encomienda, the repartimiento. Indigenous communities are forced to give tribute. This is where niggas is forced to work, right? Straight up, we just gonna cut straight through the bullshit. Niggas is forced to work, supposedly protected by Spanish elites, but in reality, it's just exploitation. What it does is draft indigenous men into mine labor, thousands at a time. And Spain actually builds this off existing Indian labor systems, but it turns into something way more violent and extractive under their control. And then when indigenous populations start collapsing because they're fucking dying from disease, overworked, and violence, Spain brings in African slaves. They don't start treating niggas better. Fuck no, fuck no, fuck no. Hell the fuck no. They bring in African slaves, especially in Caribbean plantations, sugar plantations, indigo plantations. So now you've got multiple labor systems running at once, running simultaneously alongside each other. Indigenous forced labor, African slavery, and plantation plus mining systems, all feeding the same machine. So let's talk about the quinto real, okay? Spain takes 20% of all silver, okay? I told you, these Spanish niggas love they silver, okay? Straight to the motherfucking crown it goes. That's hella fucking silver. That's massive. This is how they fund expansion. This is how they fund state power. Spain regulates all colonial trade. Nothing moves freely. Niggas is not doing what the fuck they want to do. Everything is monitored. Everything is taxed. Everything is controlled. Niggas is forced to give loans. Even the church gets hit. I don't give a damn if you praying to God. You gonna pay this money, fuck nigga. Spain forces institutions to fund the empire. Now you see extraction, taxation, war, more extraction. The cycle is running. The machine is gearing the fuck up and it's ready to go. Here is where the system becomes deeper than just economics. Spain builds a social hierarchy. You got Europeans at the top. You have indigenous people below. You have mixed categories, mestizos, and etc. Below them. And this is your early racial classification. It's not random, it's structured. for a reason. And same with religion. Spain uses the church heavily. Forced conversions, destruction of indigenous religions, burning texts, replacing belief systems. This is all to control culture. Because if you control culture, you control the heart, you control the mind. Spain reorganizes life, forces people into new settlements, changes marriage types. You just can't get married how the fuck you want to. This is where we kind of see the marriage we have today connected to Christianity. They breaking shit, they're fucking shit up to centralize and stabilize this new burgeoning system. And this is not just conquest. Again, this is rebuilding society. And this is important because people aren't just gonna sit back and go for this shit. You got indigenous revolts, right? You got Tupac Amaru rebellion. Before Tupac, you had Tupac Amaru in 1780. Now we got earlier Aztec and Mayan resistance. These niggas wasn't just gonna give up their fucking empire for a piece of fucking cake. Okay, these niggas was warriors and kings and emperors. Now people escaped forming independent societies as well. They called these maroon communities. People even resisted through litigation, even through Spanish systems, petitions, appeals. They were usually ignored, of course, but they were still resistant. So even inside of the system, people are pushing back constantly. Now, look at what this creates. It creates a colonial caste society. Europeans dominate land and power. Indigenous people and others are pushed the fuck down and oppressed. Simple as that. Everything is tied to exportation of wealth and not local development. I don't give no fuck if you niggas got sewers. I don't give no fuck if you niggas got roads. I don't give no fuck if you niggas have happy lives, sad. I don't give a damn what you niggas got. As long as you niggas give me my fucking silver. Church and the state combined. Religion is embedded into power during this time and a long time before this as well, but especially during this time, especially in Spain. You have long-term damage. We even see physical evidence, mercury poisoning and mining populations, and archaeological remains showing brutal condition. A great example is Potosi. Potosi goes from nothing to one of the biggest cities in the world because of silver. But that wealth, again, was built on forced labor. Thousands of indigenous people were drafted into mines, exposed to mercury. This is why we see huge populations of people who are poisoned by mercury. Niggas was straight up worked to death. Like, not only would they just work the fuck about you until, no, we're gonna work you to fucking death. You're gonna be sitting here with a pickaxe hitting some fucking rock until you fall the fuck over. And don't stop until then. That is your life. And that silver did not stay there. It funded wars across Europe and helped reshape the global economy. As we step back, Spain shows us the full machine. Massive extraction. We have forced labor. We have global trade. We have state control. We have racial hierarchy. We have cultural destruction. Spain doesn't just conquer the land. They turned the Americas into a machine that fed the entire world. And once the system proves it works, other empires look and say, hold on, nigga, I need me some of that. We running that too. So next, we got Portugal. Portugal is different from Spain. Spain builds a land empire, silver as well. Portugal builds a network. Spain is like, we taking whole continents. Portugal is like, we controlling the routes. What is Portugal extracting? Not just one resource like Spain. Portugal is moving through gold, slaves, sugar, spices. They basically tap into everything. Instead of one big center like Potosi, Portugal builds a chain. West Africa, East Africa, India, Southeast Asia, Brazil, all connected. They set up forts like Elmina and Ghana, where gold and enslaved people are processed and shipped out. And then Brazil becomes a major piece. Sugar plantations. That's what the fuck you need to know, basically, which becomes one of the largest, biggest industries in the world at the time. Now, here's where Portugal really changes the game, though. Portugal builds massive sugar plantations. And these are not just farms. Fuck no. These are early industrial systems. Strict schedules. You better be up at 6 a.m. and nigga, you better go to sleep at 6 a.m. Organized labor groups. You got the fucking pickers, you got the fucking processors, you got the fucking packers, you got the shippers. Everybody is in their role. And you have constant production. They were on some Henry Ford shit. And who's doing the work? Hey, you think it was the Portuguese? Fuck no. No. Of course not. We have black people. We have enslaved Africans. We got niggas by the millions. This is where you really see slavery at scale. This is where you see production for global markets. This is where you see discipline of labor. This is a preview of factory logic. In inland Brazil, we got gold extraction, also using slave labor. In Africa and Asia, Portugal doesn't just conquer everything. They work through trade monopolies, alliances, local elites, but the goal is still the same. Control labor plus resources. Now, this is where Portugal shines, is the global web. Portugal builds one of the first global trade networks. Not just one empire, but a web. Goods are constantly moving. Sugar is getting sent to Europe. Gold is getting sent to Europe. Slaves are getting sent to the Americas. Spices are getting sent across the world to global markets. They're mixing Brazilian gold and Indian Ocean trade and Atlantic slavery all into one system. But here's the thing. They don't fully control it forever. Other powers start stepping in. The Dutch, the British. They start taking over key trade routes. So Portugal starts losing its monopoly that they got by getting in the game early. Just like Spain, Portugal controls through belief. Portugal uses religion heavily. You got Catholic missions, you got Jesuits, Franciscans operating in Brazil and Goa, which was basically India. They convert people and in reality is just controlling them. Something interesting happens though. Syncretism. People mix African, indigenous, and Christian beliefs. For example, Our Lady of Aparecida in Brazil, even under control, people will reshape religion to fit their material conditions and their mental awareness at the time. Portugal promotes its own identity though. You have maritime art, you have stories of discovery, propaganda. Niggas was basically saying, we're explorers, civilizing the world. This was their justification. This was their reasoning for their fucking nonsense at the end of the day. And again, people, we're not finna go for this shit. People are not just accepting this from anybody. So you have the Quilombos. These are communities of escaped enslaved people. The biggest ones was the Palmares. This wasn't a small fucking, village or something. This was a whole society. They were self-governing. They were fighting Portuguese forces. They were lasting for decades. In Africa, and this is also due to Portugal being a weaker empire due to having less material power to exert, and their extraction was far less pervasive as their extraction was, again, more network based, more route based, more externally controlling based. In Asia and Africa, local states resist too. The Kingdom of Congo, the Aceh Salunte, sometimes fighting, sometimes negotiating, sometimes competing. Now here again is where Portugal differs from Spain and a lot of other empires. Portugal starts strong, but they don't keep the dominance, all right? They're like, I can say they're like KD. They're like KD. They're like a James Harden, pop off in the first of the game. You know what? Just check this out. They're not LeBron, okay? They're not Jordan. They're not Tim Duncan, okay? In the clutch, you can't trust Portugal. You can't trust them niggas to ball out. Why? Because they have a smaller population. Why? Because they have less military power. Why? Because they have hella debt. And other empires start catching up to these fuck niggas. So over time, they get pushed out of key areas, like we mentioned prior. And even though they decline though, they still leave a huge impact. Brazil, to this day, right? You have racism going fucking crazy in Brazil to this fucking day because of Portugal. Brazil was a plantation economy purely for extraction, built off of slavery, racial hierarchy, and later coffee extraction. Portugal helps establish long distance trade networks and Atlantic slave systems and plantation production. Portuguese language in Brazil and parts of Africa is still present to this day. Places like India and Macau become cultural islands of empire. And even archaeology, you see plantation layouts, African and European cultural mixing, physical evidence of the system. Portugal didn't need to control everything. They controlled the connection. So now compare Spain, an extraction hub built on silver, to Portugal, a trade network and global web. Both are running forced labor, global trade, extraction, violence, ideology, the same machine. But Portugal didn't build one empire. They built routes that connected the world. And once trade networks are established, now comes a new type of power, corporate power. So next comes the Dutch. Now the corporate takeover, right? Here are where things take a real turn. Because up until now, empires mostly have been ran by kings. But the Dutch, they do something different. The Dutch don't just run an empire, they run a business, okay? These niggas is about their business. The Dutch was standing on business, quite literally. So instead of a king controlling everything, the Dutch create companies. I'm talking about the Dutch East India Company. I'm talking about the Dutch West India Company. These aren't just normal businesses, okay? Please. These companies can wage war. These companies can build forts. These companies can control territory. These companies can collect taxes. Basically, they act like states and people can invest in them. Buy shares, make money. This is huge because now empire equals a profit-making business, right? This is the bourgeois fucking entangling themselves into the arts of conquering. So now what these niggas extracting, we know what they're extracting. Spices, right? These niggas food was bland as fuck. So these niggas was extracting spices heavily. Indonesia becomes the center. They got nutmeg there. They got cloves there. They got cinnamon there. They got pepper there. Instead of just trading, the Dutch go, we controlling all of it. Okay, we not just buying and fucking selling this shit. No, give me that. Here, bring that here, boy. They take over islands. They force monopolies. And they destroy competition. Sorry, let me take a sip of this. Okay, and in the Atlantic, they also get involved in sugar plantations. For example, in the Caribbean, they also get involved into slavery, right? Good old fashioned fucking forced labor, good old fashioned slavery. Now they're plugged into both systems. Indian Ocean trade and Atlantic slave economy. Labor control was flexible, but still violent at this time. This is where they're a little different. In the Americas, niggas is straight to slavery, right? Same as others. In Asia, they often use local elites. Contract labor, still coercive, but not this straight up chattel slavery. Instead of always direct control, they sometimes control through systems. But don't get it twisted. This shit wasn't fucking peaches and cream. This was exploitation. And if people resist, they use force. For example, the Banda Islands in 1621. Dutch massacre about 1,500 people just to control nutmeg production. I mean, just a fucking nutmeg, right? That's monopoly enforcement. The Dutch changed everything though. They build financial systems. The Bank of Amsterdam creates stable money for global trade, built a stock market, and people were able to buy shares in the VOC, the East India Company. This is basically early Wall Street. And you have insurance. They spread risk across investors. So now you have long distance trade that's becoming safer and you get more investment to flow in. So now the system becomes organized. It has become scalable. It has become financialized. This is capitalism leveling the fuck up. The Dutch also invest heavily into knowledge, into ideology, into mapping the world, cartography, botanical research, plants, spices, universities studying colonies. Why? Because knowledge equals power. Knowledge equals control. If you map the world, you can claim it. If you understand resources, you can exploit them better. Here's the difference from Spain and Portugal. Religion is there, Protestantism, but it's less dominant. They don't give no fuck about that, right? These are some corporate niggas. The real ideology is profit. The real ideology is trade. The real ideology is efficiency. So this is a shift from God wants this to this fucking just makes money. Straight the fuck up. Let's just cut through the bullshit. Again, though, niggas is not going for the shit. People resist. Banda resistance, like I said, which was wiped out brutally. Coercion resistance in South Africa. And you have enslaved people forming maroon communities. But like always, resistance gets crushed violently. Now let's look at what the Dutch left behind though, which was the blueprint for modern capitalism. Companies acting like states. You have financial markets, stocks, banks, investment systems. You have global trade networks, more advanced, more connected. You have cultural mixing. Places like Indonesia and South Africa show language and culture blending. You have cities like Jakarta burgeoning as Dutch trade centers. The Dutch just didn't trade the world. They turned the world into a business. So now look at the evolution. Spain is a pure extraction empire. Portugal is a trade network. And the Dutch build corporate capitalism. Same machine, but getting more and more advanced. This is where capitalism starts looking like what we recognize today. Not just kings, but corporations running the world. And now, once corporate power is proven, the next empire takes it even further, even bigger, stronger, more dominant. The British. Before we get into Britain though, we have to get into its worst enemy and its best friend. And France is interesting because they're running the same machine, but you can start seeing the cracks that form within it. France does not dominate one lane. These niggas is a jack of all trades, master of none. They run a dual system, trade and alliances in North America, along with brutal plantation economies in the Caribbean. Two completely different strategies, same motherfucking goal. Profit. So what is France extracting? It depends where you are. So in places like St. Lawrence River over there in Canada and Hudson Bay, France builds relationships with indigenous nations, Algonquin, the Huron. Instead of full conquest, they trade. Fur becomes the main commodity. Where the real money was the Caribbean. This is where the bankroll sits at. Real deal, no spill, for real. Haiti, okay? Guadeloupe, sugar, coffee, indigo, plantations. We're not fucking around here, okay? We're the French. We're fucking despicable. Despicable. Haiti, known at the time as Saint Domingue, becomes one of the richest colonies in the world. France is running trade system in one region and full plantation exploitation in another. So let's be fucking real. That Caribbean wealth wasn't coming from niggas being treated with human rights and shit. Fuck no. This shit comes from slavery. We know how niggas get down. So massive plantation system, enslaved Africans doing all the labor, brutal conditions, constant production. And France codifies this with code noir, code black, like fuck, right? Code noir in 1685. This is huge because it literally defines who is slaved, who is free, what punishments are allowed, and how race works legally. So now racism becomes law. And even though Catholicism is enforced, African spiritual practices don't disappear. They go underground and mix into new forms. France doesn't have massive silver mines like Spain. They don't need it. They make money through sugar exports, coffee, tobacco, and indigo. And they tried to expand globally through the French East India Company, trading textiles, spices, and tea. So France was fully plugged into global commodity circulation. But now here is where France is different. France is deep into culture, representation, and ideas. So you start seeing Orientalist art, exotic imagery, civilizing narratives, even scientific expeditions mapping the Pacific, studying new lands. It shapes how people see the world. This is the big one. This is where everything changes. In Haiti, in Saint Domingue, you got maroon colonies and you have constant rebellion. And then in 1791, everything explodes. The Haitian Revolution. Enslaved people rise up and fight back, and they win. 1804, Haiti becomes independent. This is the first successful slave revolution in history. This sends shockwaves across the world. This shit has never fucking happened. It proves the system is not infallible. It proves the system can be broken. Now back in North America, France relies on alliances with indigenous groups, but after losing to Britain, those regions fall under new control. So again, different strategy, but same outcome. Displacement, expansion, control. So what does France leave behind? They leave behind a refined and expanded plantation model. They leave behind legal systems, race, and control being written into law. They leave behind cultural influence, language, education, systems that still present themselves globally today. The Haitian Revolution becomes a warning, a symbol, and a catalyst, a turning point. France perfected the system, and then it showed how it could break. So now look at the evolution. Spain builds an extraction empire. Portugal connects trade. The Dutch create corporate capitalism, and France exposes the contradiction. Same machine, but now it is unstable. France made millions off of slavery, but Haiti showed that the system was not untouchable. And now we get into the empire that takes everything and pushes it to the highest level before industrialization. The British. Remember, France just showed us something important. The system has contradictions. People can fight back, but here's the reality. The system does not collapse. The system does not crumble. It expands. And Britain is the empire that perfects this expansion. By the mid 1700s, Britain is everywhere. In North America, I'm talking Virginia, I'm talking colonies, right? We know the stories. In the Caribbean, Barbados, Jamaica, India, China, I mean, fucking everywhere. This is global dominance. And how do they do it? Naval power. Control the seas, you control the world. This is where America learned that fact. Now, this is where Britain separates itself though. They don't just extract wealth. They organize it better than anyone else. Let's talk about the Bank of England 1694. This allows Britain to borrow massive amounts of money, fund wars consistently, and expand without collapsing. Through public debt and taxes, Britain creates a permanent taxation system and national debt. So now the state can fight wars nonstop and expand empire consistently and continuously. This is what we call the fiscal military state. The machine is now fully powered. So let's look at the economy. In the Caribbean, we got sugar and slavery. In places like Jamaica, the population is over 90% enslaved Africans. In North America, you have settler colonies, land extraction, and indigenous displacement. In India, now this is very important, shit's just a little different. Britain doesn't just extract resources. Unfortunately, they take control of the economy itself. So this made the system look like peasants producing, local elites collecting, and Britain profiting. So now we see forced cash crops like cotton and opium. So now regions are no longer producing for themselves, of course not. They're producing for the global market. And Britain gets very strategic with this. Instead of dominating everyone directly, they divide people. You have two-tiered systems. Europeans at the top, indigenous and enslaved people below. As simple as that. They co-opted elites in places like India. Local rulers kept their status, but they must serve British power. So now control is indirect, it's structured, and it's efficient. This is where justification evolves. Britain starts saying, we're bringing civilization. Christianity, it starts spreading. Other religions are labeled as backwards, and empire is framed as progress. Even abolition gets used ideologically. We're ending slavery because we're moral, while still controlling global labor and resources. So now ideology becomes a moral justification, not only for empire, but for domination. Like always, resistance is everywhere. Where there is smoke, there is fire. Where there is empire, there is resistance. The American Revolution, 1776. Settlers rebel over taxes and control. In India, you got peasant uprisings. You have regional resistance, like in Mysore or the Six States. In the Caribbean, you have slave revolts, like Taki's Rebellion. But most of these get suppressed. Most of these get repressed. So even though resistance exists, the system still holds. The system is resilient. Now, the legacy that we see Britain live behind is a blueprint of the modern world. This is the most important part about studying their empire. Britain creates global commodity chains, cotton to factories, soon at least sugar to Europe, tea to global trade networks, financial dominance. London becomes a global center for finance, insurance, and trade exchanges. But this is where you see the beginnings of infrastructure. They're building roads, they're building trade routes, they're building early communication systems. Everything is now connected. Everything is now organized. Everything is now scalable. This is the bridge to industrial capitalism. So now look at the full evolution. Spain builds extraction. Portugal connects the world. The Dutch turn it into a business. France exposes the contradictions within it, and Britain perfects and scales everything. The same system, now fully global, as everyone had played their role. By the time Britain takes over, the world is no longer separate systems. It is one system, one economy, one machine. And now everything is in its place. Capital is accumulated, labor is controlled, and the world is connected. So the question is no longer how does the system work? Now the question becomes what happens when the system industrializes? All right, so now let's step back, right? Let's zoom the fuck out. Because everything we just went through, Spain, Portugal, Dutch, France, Britain, this was not just trade, this was force, right? A lot of people will tell you this is when global trade started. Fuck no, we just learned how this shit started, right? They like to tell you it was just people peacefully exchanging goods. Hell no, it was violence. The world market was built through war, through conquest, through law, through taxation, through slavery. You don't get empire without the state, and you don't get capitalism without empire. They build each other. States use armies, navies, and laws to expand control and territory. And then that expansion produces wealth, produces moolah, guapo, gold, silver, sugar, labor. And then that wealth goes straight back into the state, funding more war, funding more expansion. This is an infinite money loop. During this time, the ocean becomes a weapon. Think about what changes physically. The ocean stopped being a barrier and it became a highway for empire. Portugal takes Ceuta in 1415, and that's one of the first moves outwards. And then you get Spain and Portugal dividing the world, like, oh, you take this side and oh, I'm gonna take this side. That's not exploration, nigga. That's organized conquest. And then you get places like Elmina Castle in 1482. These are infrastructure for extraction, infrastructure for slavery. The system is not just some faraway entity anymore. The system has placed itself on the land, has grounded itself, and has became physical. Now look at the Americas. Spain doesn't just conquer land. They overthrow the Aztec, they overthrow the Inca, and then they restructure everything. Land, labor, tribute, production. This is how you get large scale extraction. So conquest equals economic transformation. And then silver connects the world. This is the moment everything clicks. In 1571, Manila, you got American silver, you've got Asian markets, and now you got European trade, okay? All connected. China even restructures its taxes around silver. So now peasants in China depend on silver coming from the Americas. That is global integration. Let's get into the part where people miss. The system is already industrial before factories. Look at Potosi, massive mining operations, water powered systems, engineering infrastructure. This is not some primitive shit. That's organized production at scale. Okay, same with plantation, strict schedules, division of labor, constant output. That's proto-industrialization. Now look at something like sugar. Sugar goes from luxury to everyday consumption. What does that mean? People's diets change, work rhythms change, economies change. So now slavery in the Caribbean affects daily life in Europe. And scale matters. We're not talking small numbers here, okay? We're not talking little boy numbers here. We talking LeBron numbers. Transatlantic slave trade, 12.5 million niggas is taken. 10.7 million niggas survived the journey. That is a system that still echoes today. This system isn't just economic, right? It is legal. You get laws like the Barbados Slave Code in 1661. You get Virginia law in 1662. Child follows the mother, right? So if the mom was a slave, then nigga, you a slave. Straight the fuck up. And what does that do? It turns people into property. It makes slavery hereditary. So now exploitation becomes permanent and self-reproducing. And during this time, again, finance and war become one system. Look at Britain. The Bank of England in 1694 was literally created to fund war. So now finance supports conquest. War expands empire. Empire creates wealth. Wealth feeds finance. That loop is fully developed. Infinite money glitch. Different regions respond differently. In Eastern Europe, niggas get deeper into surf. We done learned about that in Unit 2. Africa is reshaped by the slave trade. Asia is integrated through trade and silver, and the Americas are reorganized completely for extraction. This is uneven, connected, and a global transformation. Knowledge became a tool of empire.
Shout out to you, Chancellor, for letting me come on here, talk about the cultural aspect of colonialism. When I say culture, I'm talking about customs, beliefs, dance, music, how you eat, what you're dressing, all that. And a lot of times, many of us view those things as being neutral and objective, as if the colonizer of colonialism has not impacted those. Right now, I'm communicating with y'all through English. Communicating with you because English was the language that the colonizer brought, and specifically believed that that way of life was more superior than, my ancestors. So when you think about colonialism, it's always important to not only think about the bloodshed and the guns or how they bring the military in war, but also think about that soft part of how coloniality is able to impact a globe or impact a land. The way that culture becomes the get down part. And if you don't want to get down, we'll make you lay down. That's usually the military. I would say the way that culture has impacted us, especially when it comes to colonialism, is always believing that the colonial way or the ways in which the colonizer has brought into the world is the ones that we have to perfect, the ones that we have to perform and make better. From democracy to our concepts about, progression forward, linear progression, to the way that we even think about governments being set up. A lot of those are culturally structured by how colonialism is able to come in and think about how there's a way of life that is much more superior, that can bring the primitive nature of another people out. And what we see, whether we're talking about British colonization, French colonization, American colonization, there's a pattern for how language and how ways of life gets baked into how we should buy into who is in power and say they should be in power because they have the better way of life. Right now, we see the fall of the American empire happening, and a lot of that is happening because the cultural aspect of American hegemony was starting to crumble well before Donald Trump got in office. I think that when we start talking about American stability or American democracy, or even talking about how America's supposed to be one of the major global empire states to maintain global economy, we got to think about how culture has been one of the things that's been deployed. In modern times, we know that Black culture has been used as one of the major exports of American culture to see, look, how we treat the Negroes, we treat them well, we let them sing, we let them dance. Look how transparent and look how transcultural the relationship that America has in terms of culture. This is why you should join America. This is why you should listen to America. Once we got to the internet, really before we got into the internet, I will argue towards the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan got into office, is when the global economy, the global world, a lot of us started to have that veer removed from our heads, and especially in America. I think that a lot of the people throughout the globe already understood that America's cultural soft power perspective had nothing to do with how they would come and rain power down on you if they needed your resources. So to get down and lay down in terms of the coloniality or cultural hegemony, or you say like this, colonial cultural hegemony. Hegemony is the political, economic, and cultural dominance of one group, state, or entity over others, primarily maintained through the consent and influence rather than force. Originating from the Greek word hegemonia for leadership, it functions by shaping beliefs and values, often termed cultural hegemony, by Antonio Gramsci. To make seems who dominates as being natural, think about Darwinism, the natural selection, and also think about how Darwinism comes from a particular socio-economic background and how the economic background is the one that has benefited from colonialism. So him speaking from a colonial aspect has allowed for him to be an authority on power. And a lot of times when we think about who gets to have what, when, where, and how in the world, not only in terms of contemporary America, but also thinking about history, there's always some type of trace to colonial power that we get to see how it dictates how we understand history right now. A lot of us heard that simply and usually is like, history is written by the winners. To the victors goes the spoils, But I think colonial hegemony is something that creates a distinction between consent and coercion. And we start to see that from a structural standpoint, colonialism is always able to ruse a narrative of consent when in actuality it's a reality of coercion. I just got done making a video about, his name was George Gillette. He was one of the chiefs in North Dakota. It's a picture of him seen weeping, crying, being forced to sign over 150,000 acres to the United States federal government for a dam. I would argue this is an illustration of how colonial hegemony works, because now you have people that are able to characterize and say, no, this is a applicable consensual document that happened between these three tribes in the United States federal government where they signed over this land. It doesn't take into account the cultural authority that one has and how you're able to coerce individuals into realities where then you can say, no, you did it to yourself. you did it to yourself. Think about how now the British and the rest of the British and America and the rest of the Western world is able to always characterize Palestine as being, they chose Hamas 16 years ago. I don't give a damn if all these kids and all these people is over here below the age of 18. We're gonna hold them accountable for something we coerced their ass into a long time ago because the only option they had was Hamas. But also, I know over here, I can get a little more radical over here. So we all know that Hamas was the resistance freedom fighters that was trying to resist against, the colonization, settlement, occupation of Israel. I think this right here is another example too, of showing you how culture is always a part of the soft power of how colonialism works. Now, we know settler colonialism and colonialism, two different things. I know my boy got y'all on that already, but in terms of settler colonialism, in terms of Israel, we know that they have culturally been able to dominate the narrative by saying, does Israel have the right to exist? Does Israel have the right to defend itself? That is a cultural response to say anything that's trying to negotiate my legitimacy or trying to negotiate how I'm doing this genocide on Palestinians. I'm going to culturally create some type of statement. You feel me? Create me a playbook. I used to be a debate coach. I would argue that Zionism created a cultural playbook that allowed for them to rhetorically play with emotions and feelings, as well as rhetorically play with different concepts that we've romanticized and sanitized for being the best. I.e., this is the only democracy within the Middle East. Culturally, that tells us, hey, democracy is the most fair thing we can have. Therefore, the only fair thing we have in the Middle East or in Swana is the imaginary state known as Israel. See what I'm saying? So we see that culture gets to be transferred from a customs, values, moral standpoint, then it gets to get strived on to institutions, and that's how it get to be seen as being legitimate or illegitimate. Even if they are responsible for doing the same military or political violence or something that's similar. You have the cultural distinctions that says that, hey, when we do it, it is for freedom in the name of peace. And when they do it, it's in the name of terrorism. That is a cultural, phenomenon, I would argue, that is a product of how colonization and colonizers always have the authority and power and mean different instances to dictate, this is how it's gonna go down. This is who we should see as being the victors and who we should see as being the victims. This is who we should see as being the perpetual initiators and always being the ones that bring it. When we start talking about war and how war gets justified in terms of, I'm gonna take your land because you start the war, it usually happens very culturally. Right now, Israel is purposely trying to wage war with its neighboring countries because culturally it understands, it can say, well, you waged war with me, you started it, and I'm gonna take your land as a result of war. That's a cultural understanding. But it's one that only favors them. When they get to do preemptive strikes against Lebanon or preemptive strikes against, Syria, those are not seen as acts of war that now justify Syria or Lebanon going and taking parts of Israel. Because culturally, hey, you got to be able to abide by the Geneva Conventions and international law. Culturally, America can say it's the country about democracy, have a democratic socialist, elected, and let's say some random country in South America, and then if that country, if that elected official is not friendly to American corporations, America will manufacture consent on a cultural level in America that allows for us to go in there and overthrow the government and put a dictator in there in the name of democracy. Malcolm X always talked about the hypocrisy of democracy, and I think talking about the cultural aspect of colonialism gets into the hypocrisy of democracy, because I would argue no matter how much, even if I understand some might even disagree, but I'm willing to put my debate skills on the line for this one. No matter how much you want to romanticize the concept of democracy, it cannot be divorced from its colonial roots. It cannot be divorced from the way expansionism and imperialism is one of the baked in aspects for how Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiastes, you know what I'm saying, in 500 AD, in 500 BC, a long ass time ago by some Greeks, you know what I'm saying? Editor, put it on the screen for me, man. I know you got some nice little things back there. Have to go find me some debate evidence, man. For y'all that don't know, I have a master's degree in human relations and a master's degree in adult higher education. And it is very important for me to point out that my degrees came before ChatGPT. My research abilities came before y'all discovered ChatGPT. I'm gonna give you the source. This comes from Carleton University as well as EBSCO. Cultural hegemony describes how Western powers, primarily Britain and the US, framed Iranian oil as legitimate Western asset, not Iranian property. This narrative normalized foreign exploitation by portraying Iran as incapable of managing its own resources, framing the 1953 coup against the Prime Minister Mossadegh as a necessary intervention rather than theft. When I think about cultural hegemony, I think about all the ways that legitimacy gets baked into certain people's actions, while illegitimacy is always already seen for the individuals that's in resistance. When I think about how resources gets dictated based off of hegemony, I always think about how particular resources are always justified by being in control of production when it comes to white folks, and how the non-European powers are usually seen as being incapable and irrational when it comes to maintaining different resources. Culturally, we know that American hegemony justifies itself by saying the only way we can keep global order is by maintaining social order, which is America on the top. Culturally, it is able to convince a lot of individuals with that by how it exports culture, how it's able to dictate and say, hey, the only way this oil can be evenly distributed if it's done by the benevolent democratic power throughout the world. And we hope that you can agree with us on a cultural aspect, because if you don't, we would have to bring that military in on your ass. Cultural hegemony is all about manufacturing legitimacy. Hegemony meant Westerners framed themselves as a technological, civilizationally superior, meaning brown people, black people, all y'all. You know what? To me, cultural hegemony is so insidious that the ways Europe have also been dominated by cultural hegemony is something that we should always be critical of as well. I know black on black crime, or the Middle East, always peace in the Middle East, we always talk about it being war torn. I would argue that all of those are products of cultural hegemony, and how the Western powers are able to maintain its authority over all these regions is on perception, because culturally we're gonna be able to bring y'all, some of y'all, manufacturing hegemony. Not only manufacturing hegemony, the discourse and the propaganda. A lot of worldly advancements, especially in contemporary times, is always structured under the cultural implications of capitalism, democracy, or some European leadership authority of power. As somebody that read a lot of Afro-pessimism, I think it's always dope for how Afro-pessimist literature borrowed from a lot of different literature bases in terms of concepts and terms, while also critiquing them. So when I think of Gramsci, I'm definitely thinking of not only his cultural hegemony, I'm thinking of how Afro-pessimism talked about these grammars of suffering, and how the natal alienation of black folks became a part of the cultural hegemony, or part of the lexicon, meaning that if you wanted to get some power or authority within civil society, you were able to play to the cultural aspect of anti-blackness. It allowed for you to get a little credence, or even for you to gain a little capital within some particular space. Antonio Gramsci, though, not even trying to just, go with the man's just my straight, frame of thinking about Afro-pessimism, is a theory of cultural hegemony that explained how the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, maintained its power in capitalist societies, not through force, but by shaping cultural norms, values, and beliefs. Recently, I heard a speech of Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, talking about how the French were saying because we your friends, we should be able to put a military base in Burkina Faso. And what Ibrahim Traore responded, it was like, shit, America your friend too, but you ain't got no base over there. I think about how instability and dependency is made to be like a not only a cultural phenomenon, but a value that a lot of the Western world buys in, that allows for us to continue to exploit Africa for its natural resources, while at the same time saying it is stuck in the past and it can't take care of itself. It becomes very cultural. Gramsci argued that the creation of the new working class intellectuals to develop a counter-hegemony is described as in the studies as a political theory. And I think that when it comes to how I learned about human relations and how I learned about thinking about post-culture, thinking about post-structuralism, and thinking about just the way the world has been made in this industrial area we're living in, a lot of the ways that capitalism justifies itself is through its indoctrination of culture. In a lot of ways that American power has been able to justify itself is through the cultural influence. Black resistance in relationship to art, in relationship to culture. The artists of the Black Renaissance movement found themselves under surveillance and found themselves being targeted because we understand that art is how we are able to access our imaginations. And when in culture, we understand that art is an inherent part of how we're able to dictate and how we're able to define what culture is. I think the contradiction or the hypocrisy of democracy that we can see is that the same European powers that say this African country or this Asian country, is backwards and they ain't never been able to contribute anything towards America, towards the global world history, also never want to let go of those cultural artifacts. So when you think about culture, think about when it comes to anything having some value, whose museum has the real legitimacy to be able to hold the culture, be able to provide proper safety and security for the culture? Usually the people that we should be protecting the culture from. Art is always supposed to be one of two things: capturing the ambiance of the reality that we in, or because you can do both, or being resistance to the powers that's trying to mess up the ambiance of the reality that we in. Usually who gets to dictate art gets to also dictates the culture. Also, who gets to dictate the culture usually gets to dictate power on who gets to be and who gets to get what, when, where, and how. So if you don't have a cultural analysis for how colonialism works, I don't think you really care about colonialism. And I think that you probably lost in the sauce for how you being hoodwinked and bamboozled for how colonialism seeps through the pores of our culture. What I liked about Afro-pessimism, going back to that a little bit, is that it gave me the verbiage to talk about the libidinal economy, the economy of feelings and emotions, and how we're able to trade, barter, and use transactions with our feelings and our emotions. In the framework of cultural hegemony, it's always integral that we always talk about whose feelings and emotions culturally gets to mobilize itself into becoming a movement that mainstream will acknowledge or the history books acknowledge, and whose emotions and whose sadness and whose suffering gets mobilized to become terrorism. To me, this is a part of cultural hegemony and how white men, especially in America, being pissed off and mad can be turned into some legitimate, like, nah, these was just January 6ers, these was just pissed off civilians. Or it can be in any other instance, hey man, if you are a British colony and you had people in the colony trying to overthrow the British authority, but any other context, you'd be called a terrorist. But in America, we call it patriotism. So you see that culture always dictates who's right, who's wrong. Last thing right here. Just because it has been normalized doesn't mean it is natural. A lot of cultural norms are things that's just agreed on over time. They become practices and they end up becoming values of the culture, but it's just cultural norms. A lot of the ways we understand the law, in a lot of ways that dominant ideology gets passed on, is usually helped and spurred by the status quo or cultural norms. What I liked about Gramsci and what I liked about Afro-pessimism in terms of Frank Woodison is that they always, for me, called into question how I understood cultural norms and who benefited from them. I know that from a Black Power standpoint, if I can characterize individuals for being inherently deviant and saying that their culture is thuggish and that it leads to baby mamas and gang culture, I can always use these cultural critiques to also say they spill over into your political autonomy or into how you express yourself politically, or simplified. You having a culture of thuggish, buggish, bullshit, nigga shit means that the culture will also enforce how you politically are able to position yourself. And because we feel like culturally you are thugs, or culturally you are terrorists, or culturally you're gypsies, yeah, this obviously spills over to your political representation. And we don't think you should get political representation because you're a thug. Thuggish, buggish bone. And it's important to acknowledge too that Gramsci was a Marxist. Gramsci was trying to forward Marx theory by getting more into the cultural aesthetics, getting more into the cultural aspects.
So we cannot overlook this. Science, maps, botany, classification, all of this gets used to control land, to control people, and to control resources. Even race is scientifically classified. So knowledge becomes power. And the system reached its peak by the 1700s. Everything is in place before industry. We have global trade networks. We have massive capital accumulation. We have controlled labor systems, and we have strong states, financial systems, and we have legal structures. And then you start seeing early machines, early industrial inventions, but the world is not fully industrial yet. By the end of this period, the world has been rebuilt, though. Not peacefully, not naturally, but through violence, extraction, domination, and resistance. The machine is complete. And now we're about to see what happens when this machine gets powered by industry. This is where we welcome the Industrial Revolution. Now, before we end things off, I need y'all to understand something. Everything we just talked about was not just history, okay? It was the creation of a system. And that system does not just disappear, okay, into thin fucking air. The system repeats itself. Even after this colonial period, you see the same pattern show up again. Look at places like the Congo. Different time, different ruler, same logic. Forced labor, extraction, and fucking violence. People getting fucking mutilated. Not for producing enough, okay? That's not new. That's the same system, just continuing. New powers, same machine. Look at Germany. They come in later, they take land in Africa, and what happens? Land seizure, labor exploitation, and mass violence, even genocide, okay? So now it should be clear. It's not about one country, it's about the system itself. The system spreads globally. It's not just Europe either. Look at Japan. They start off isolated, structured, organized, but once they get pulled into the global system, they transform. They become imperial. So now the system is global. Anybody can operate it. So what does this tell us? The system we just studied is not about race. It's not about religion. It's not about one group. It's about control, power, and extraction. And once it exists, it reproduces itself over and over again. So by the end of this period, the world is not just connected, it's locked into a system that creates wealth by extracting from others. And that system does not end, it evolves. So now you understand something most people don't. The modern world was not built naturally. It was built by force.